First of all, we are taping this show prior to the decision as to whether or not we'll find out if there's going to be a government shutdown or not. What's really going on here? Republicans are trying to make the case that it is about cutting the deficit. It's about, really owning up to the Tea Party folks who really want them to cut more. But Democrats are saying, look, you got the whole issue of Planned Parenthood and the EPA that's really driving this conversation, and it's not really about the deficit.
This reminds me of 1995. It's going to be the battle of the messages, who has the better message and what the public believes. And the Republicans are losing right now, in my opinion, because if it's about Planned Parenthood and EPA, they have a problem because people aren't going to stand for troops not getting paid, losing jobs, and the Congress paying itself over some nonsense.
Now that's what's amazing. Congress. Most people don't even realize that typically Congress always exempts themselves from the actual laws they pass.
Sure. But it's actually, I think this is actually constitutional where Congress and President has to get paid. But that aside, what's going on to me, I think, is a little bit different from what we saw in 94, 95, because I think we have a whole class, a group of people who've been elected to Congress who are very different from that class. You have a group of people who are trying to sort of reshape the government to meet their ideological perspective on things, which is not what you should typically do in appropriations. I think the overreach of this class will be this, that they think they're there for ideology, as opposed to them being there because they were not the incumbent member of the party in charge. And that's the overreach.
Here's what I'm trying to understand here. We have been going through a difficult economic situation in this country. When they had the tax compromise, Republicans and Democrats offered up that we could do nothing to stop the restarting of our economy. Yet when you talk to many economists, they say if you adopt Congressman Paul Ryan's budget, if you accept a lot of the cuts they are offering, that's the exact thing you're doing. Agree or disagree?
Well, yes and no. Roland, let me tell you, going back to what some analysts are saying, some economic analysts are saying, they're saying, look, this is a time of recession, as you said, economic downturn, and we're trying to climb out of it. At that time, you should not be making the deep cuts because more people are going to lose their jobs. Either way, you've got government jobs being lost. Last month, 15,000 government jobs were shed, and we saw an increase, 0.2% of the black unemployment going up.
But of course, Republicans like losing government jobs, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, making government smaller. But at the same time, you have to remember also 20%, and I'm going to talk about minorities who are going to be affected either way with this government, with a shutdown or the potential of a shutdown, and even when you cut the budget. Either way, when you cut government jobs, more minorities are disproportionately in government workforces locally, and the jobs will be shed.
But I'm not talking about
government programs.
But there's also larger
programs
sort of, I mean, it's budgetary. It doesn't make any sense economically, and you can see, look, what the Tories did in the UK. I was over in Brussels for the Brussels Forum the other week, and there is a lot of uprising about what the Tories their deep cuts. The UK's economy was beginning to rebound. It is now falling back into a ditch.
The Tories are the Conservative Party.
The Conservative Party in the UK, and falling back in a ditch, and you can see people are rioting and taking to the streets. It is disastrous economic policy for them to be making these sort of cuts. These cuts aren't about the economy. These cuts are about ideology.
Chris.
Well, yeah, there's no question that this is about ideology. I don't think that there's any question about that, because in fact, the Republicans have to satisfy the Tea Party. End of discussion. And so the whole Planned Parenthood discussion is really about ideology. At the end of the day, I think people should really call it what it is. Now, you can agree with it or not, but in fact, if we want to say don't put riders on bills, we should say that for everyone. Because in all these instances, putting a rider on a bill, which is the problem with the Planned Parenthood thing here, they all do that. So if we want to reform it, then say no riders on bills.
But I do believe, though, the issue is not necessarily you putting riders on it. What Democrats are saying is that rider, it's what's stopping from there being an agreement. Not the fact there is a rider, but that particular rider. And so Republicans do not want to remove that rider. You can have several riders, but they want that specific one attached to this bill.
Well, and they want it attached because, again, this is an ideological battle. Now, people can agree or disagree with that, but this is about, at the end of the day, it's about ideology.
So
this is not the time for an ideological battle when you have a budget that you have to get in by midnight as of Friday today, or your government's going to shut down. Troops aren't going to get paid. You're going to have Social Security checks. If you have them in the mail, you're going to have issues. If you have them electronically, I understand you're going to be okay.
Troops
so
are going to get paid.
Troops will get paid late.
Delayed,
but how the heck, I ain't going to say this on TV.
Go ahead,
how do you
go ahead.
justify, again, and I understand you're saying constitutionally, Cornell, we don't disagree, but is it right to exempt myself and I get paid while I put the screws to everybody else? I don't think that's going to fly.
To me, that's a side. The problem, the problem here is that when you look at the polling, you've got the core of the Republican base are not for the compromise. And in fact, the Speaker of the House has been told not to even use the word compromise because politically it's not where his base is.
And that to me really sets this whole thing up. And that is, whether you like it or not, you have Democrats controlling the Senate, President's Democrat, you have Republicans controlling the House. Naturally, if you want to get anything done, there has to be a compromise. Absolutely. And so it appears as if Republicans are using the same tactic they did with the tax cuts, and that is we will stand our ground, and we are hoping, Mr. President, that you blink again.
Well, see, and that's the problem. And I go back to what I said when he blinked on the tax cuts last time. Because, in fact, he did blink on the tax cuts last time. So the strategy is, look, he's going to blink on this again. And keep in mind, we're talking about a budget that should have been passed last year. In addition to which, they're setting up the larger political debate. Because this is just, we're talking about a shutdown now. This is part A. There's going to be parts B and part C.
Because you also have the whole issue of the debt ceiling coming up in a couple of months.
But just real quickly, part of the sort of his ability, and this is just pure sort of political strategy here, is part of his ability to sort of, you say blink, I say reach out and compromise the last time around, was that it gives him the credentials now to say, you know what, I am a compromiser, but this goes too far. If he had not compromised that time, he would be in a bad position right now.
I think Republicans lose the message. I don't see how they win a message saying that this was over ideology. I don't disagree that it is, but this is why I talk about 95. You had Newt Gingrich and the conservatives, and I disagree, Cornell, that class in 94 wasn't conservative and they had a contract with America.
But these guys are crazy.
But you know what? Cornell. First of all, you mentioned this whole issue of the president being able to say that I reached out. This also plays directly into, frankly, his re-election effort.
Yes.
Because this whole conversation, first of all, of course, he announced on Monday, kicking off his re-election campaign. And if you look at how the Electoral College map has changed, okay, he won Indiana. He won North Carolina, states still affected by this economy. And so he's making a direct play, I believe, to those independent voters, knowing and also a fired-up Democratic base as a result of what happened in Wisconsin and Ohio and Indiana. And out
west, too, Roland.
And so that's why I think in this case he won't blink. Because he understands that he has to have a fired-up base and appeal to independent voters. But if he backs down and gives them what they want, then all of a sudden they're simply saying another President Jimmy Carter.
And Title X is not strictly about abortion, and people and funding, federal funds going to abortion. And you have to remember both parties. One party is not for abortion, and the other party is. And if the president were to back down on that, he would have a lot of Democrats very, very upset on this abortion issue. You've got some prominent Republicans who are against saying, okay, you cannot have the issue of abortion, saying that a woman can't have an abortion. Like, for instance, Condi Rice, when she was Secretary of State, it was talked about the reason why she couldn't run because she was pro-choice. And that issue is polarizing in this town.
But here's the deal, though, Sophia. You can speak to this, and Chris, and that is Republicans. Whether you have Rick Santorum, of course, he wants to have this conversation.
Of course.
But it seems every other Republican is saying, look, if we have a conversation that does not involve economics, we lose. They do not want the social...
push that conversation in this budget battle.
That's why I started this discussion. I told you this was a messaging issue, and the Republican Party doesn't have the right messengers, first of all, to carry this off. You got Boehner, you got Cantor, you got Ryan, all guys I know well and like, but they're all very conservative guys who are seen as out of touch with most of mainstream America.